everybody. Welcome to another episode of FinOps Fridays. My name is Hunter Willis, and I've got Ryan Niksch with us. And Ryan is a Principal Partner Solutions Architect for IBM with AWS. Ryan, welcome to FinOps Fridays. It's a pleasure to have you here. Why don't you do a quick introduction and tell us a little more about yourself?
Great to be here. Have worn many hats over the years. Last decade or so, I've been working with Amazon Web Services. Recently focused on large-scale enterprise customers migrating workloads to AWS, a lot of app modernization, business modernization processes, and on the partner side of the fence now, so working with some of those large-scale partners, facilitating those same customers. So working with VMware, Red Hat, IBM, and yeah, it's a fun space to be in.
That's great. Yep. And we've had a lot of great conversations. I've worked with you on some projects in the past as well. And I thought you would be a perfect person to have on FinOps Fridays because of all of the implementations you've seen and kind of the pitfalls you've seen customers make and different organizations make, as well as, help them avoid those, obviously, as they're going into AWS and multi-cloud environments. Ryan, so the first question I want to ask you to just kind of dive into this, right, is talk to us about maybe just starting big, right? The biggest challenges you see with organizations planning for costs in the cloud as they're going into a migration scenario, right? Can you lay out what that looks like and the considerations that you help customers walk through?
I'm so glad you ring-fenced that into cost, because when you were going through the initial parts of that question, I was like, God, there's so many. Right.
Talk to me about the security, organization, no, exactly.
Patch management's top of everybody's minds right now. Right. So
it's a pamphlet that says, so you're starting a 4-year migration. What is that gonna, give me all the considerations.
I think as an afterthought, if you look at, and probably when we did the introduction, we had a lot of people wondering, why the hell do we have a guy who does migrations talking on FinOps Fridays? Most of the migrations I see to AWS over the last, say, 11 years have been focused around an idea of let's get into AWS or get into the cloud as quickly as possible. Then we can take advantage of the things on the cloud to facilitate whatever my next step is, whether that's a business modernization strategy. And the byproduct of that thinking is many people have a very rough-edged approach of let's take everything in its current state, let's just lift and shift things into the cloud. And cost optimizations, how do I tweak the knobs and dials, become a secondary thought. They become something of I'll neaten things up once I'm there. And if you go back to 2013, 2014, there was that fantastic video for how BuzzFeed did their migration from, their data centers during a tropical cyclone, and there was flooding and chaos and confusion, and they got into the cloud and they got back up and running in a couple of hours, and then they made things better. People still think that way. And the spiked pit or the challenge with that is it then relies on you to get into the cloud and then utilize things like AWS billing constructs to see, where are my rough edges? Where are my cost wastage points? And then only start thinking about, how do I optimize this? Now, the great thing about AWS and cloud providers in general is there is an inherent elasticity. I have the ability to scale up, I can scale down, I can change things with a simple API call. So for most customers, this isn't a glaring red flag. It's not a huge problem. It's get into the cloud, then do a right-sizing investigation, and then change things. What this tends to delay, however, is a bigger cost benefit where, you could be buying things or signing contracts that provide you an even greater discount on your underlying AWS service costs, but you don't want to take that step because you're still exploring, have I selected the right size database instance? Have I selected the right size EC2 instance? So it's what happens is it drags out this cost optimization journey, in most cases up to about 6 months. where if we started the entire cost optimization journey right in the beginning with our initial planning, if we did it with the discussions with security teams talking about how do I make sure I'm building something secure, we could probably shrink that time frame. And I would actually go as far as to say for customers who are in a hybrid context, where they're not moving everything to AWS overnight like BuzzFeed did, which is most people, you could end up with optimizations on both sides of the fence that are really impactful to the business.
Talk to us again. Let's talk more about those details, right? So like as we're planning that migration, we're making the assumption of those cost efficiencies in the future, and then we start taking the steps to those deployments, right? So we've lifted and shifted some things. Do you see that, like, do organizations quickly catch on that they're going to have to do a better job of organizing these things and slow down to plan? Or do you feel like they kind of see as, hey, the project's already started, we're just going to keep doing as we're doing? Or is there's kind of a mix there?
Well, I would like to, for the most part, the vast majority of customers know that they're going to go through a cost optimization phase. There's just a delay to it. They've got other priorities, and they'll get to it a little bit later. And
Sure.
what I mean by a little bit later is usually if you're in a project where you're migrating things, it's within the first 3 months of that workload being on AWS, which in a FinOps context sounds like forever. Then there is a customer, and these are the smaller subset, they don't think of this at all. It becomes a horrific realization when they get their first bill and they're like, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that big a number. Panic sets in, chaos ensues, some resort to blame storming. And for that tiny demographic, it's a very shock and awe. Have I made the right decision? And for some of those customers, it turns into, is this a third-party ISV software that is now incredibly expensive? And the knee jerk is, right, how do I get rid of this? How do I throw away 30 years of investment in this product because it's so expensive and go to something that I'm unfamiliar with, but I think it's cheaper? Or people flip it over and say, oh my gosh, cloud is just so insanely expensive. Why did I come here? And in both of those cases, I'd say neither of those is true. So what we see is let's talk about customers who are migrating and doing this retroactively. They move their workloads into the cloud. Most don't wait for their first bill. They don't wait until the end of the month to get the finalized bill. What most customers do is they very quickly turn on some sort of cost tracking mechanism in AWS, and they're tracking this expenditure in a daily capacity. So they're looking in those first few days, what does my billing look like? And what does my resource utilization look like? So they're utilizing AWS tools like a Cost Explorer. They're utilizing tools such as, AWS CloudWatch, where you're getting metrics and telemetry from the things that you're running, and you're seeing your utilization. And very quickly you can see, hang on, I've potentially oversized this. Many customers take what they have on premises, and because it doesn't have the same kind of elasticity, it's built for what my peak utilization is, not for what my minimalistic utilization is. So when I bring that as is to AWS, it's ridiculously oversized. And they don't take into account that they've taken some of those building blocks out and they've maybe adopted an AWS service to replace it. So most customers end up with an oversized implementation that can be shrunk down within the first couple of days. And if you're monitoring your expenditure and you're monitoring your utilization, you can shrink that down. But this happens in post-migration. What's starting to shift now is customers are starting to say, I've had a journey through, say, a pandemic. I maybe had to close down a whole bunch of theme parks, or I was in the entertainment industry where we didn't do business there. Maybe I'm an airline where business was poor during that time frame and I lost revenue in that time frame. Now we're 2 years later, but those companies are still thinking about, how do I recoup those costs? How do I do any new work in a cost-efficient way? Cost efficiencies have become much more important to customers, right up there with security if you look at the latest IDC trends.
I would definitely, yeah, and I've seen that, and it's amazing, right? Because of the other number I throw out there is that with the same kind of analysts like Forrester, Gartner, IDC, the estimation there pretty much across the board that everybody gives is about, they think that about 30% of their cloud spend is waste, which is, the whole reason the FinOps Foundation is, I mean, it's exploding right now. When I first heard of the FinOps Foundation, they had a few thousand members. I've heard that, I just heard today they went over 22,000, I think, is the number right now, and they're still growing at a lightning fast pace. I want to ask you, right? So one of the number one challenges that if you go to data.finops.org, the FinOps Foundation does an annual survey, and one of the biggest challenges that they give year after year has been getting engineers to take action on the kind of right sizing that you just mentioned. What have you seen in terms of, like, as organizations are just getting started in the cloud or building a whole subset of new resources in the AWS, for instance? What have you seen organizations do, and what have you recommended that organizations do to kind of operationalize that right sizing from the engineering side, and getting engineers to take a task to, like, kind of re-architect some of the things that may be more difficult to right size?
So I think the first thing we need to acknowledge is this is not an AWS challenge. This is, even for the customers that I'm serving in a migration capacity, they're large-scale hybrid entities. They're trying to solve the cost optimization problem moving to AWS, but at the same time where they're coming from, in many cases, which is on premises. And there's an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone here. We start assessing the cost footprint too late. We need to shift that forward. And one of the things that we're starting to see is the better incorporation of tools and technology as part of that observability mentality. So we're starting to see customers adopt a variety of things. And strangely enough, most of them fall into the IBM portfolio right now. Apptio's cloudability is definitely one of them. Something where I can hook into the products and services I'm running on AWS, something that I can hook into products and services on premises, and give me a perspective of what is costs, being able to report on the aggregates of costs, more importantly, being able to extrapolate where those costs are going, what they might look like in the future. Then there's another layer which gets us a little bit closer to your question about actioning that, and that is, what can I do to get visibility of resource utilization, and where am I wasting things because I've just got more than I practically need? And we're starting to see customers utilize AWS for some of that, things like AWS CloudWatch metrics to see what's your utilization. But more and more, we're seeing customers adopt a third-party type solution that is going to integrate and complement what is coming from, say, something like cloudability. In my case, I see a lot of IBM's Turbonomic being combined with that. So you've got something that is very, very clever at what the resource utilization is, but it has a layer of automation that can be utilized. So what we're seeing now is for non-critical, non-production workloads, especially where there's a lot of exploration, where customers have a play time where they're not sure what this is going to cost, but they don't want to hinder that play time. You've got things like cloudability and Turbonomic in there. And the automation that comes from the combination of those two means that infrastructure teams don't have to take the insights and then go and implement that. They can have the tools automatically do it for them in a non-production context where it's safe to explore. And if those are favorable outcomes, they can then manually implement those similar changes into their production workloads. If I had to bring it home, if you're not already considering costs as part of every step of your business, I would seriously start looking at some sort of organizational change management that brings cost as a fundamental pillar of your architectural process, of your well-architected pursuit. If you're pursuing security, if you're pursuing performance, if you're pursuing reliability, you should be pursuing cost. And I don't mean fixate on it like the Spanish Inquisition and everything should be the cheapest it can be. It's at the beginning, just have a visibility of what are your costs, where are your heat maps, what is costing you the most, and relate that to resource utilization. So visibility of cost and performance side by side is something I think we should be striving for. The decisions you make, the actions you take based on that, I feel can come later, because once you've got insight, you can then take a deep breath, calm down, and in a very collected way say, where am I going to invest, where it's going to make the most impact? Fix those things first. So don't become penny wise and pound foolish. The other element is don't, and this is for every customer I work with, but they predominantly are hybrid customers. Don't think of cost optimizations just being something that you're going to do for your future innovation. There is a lot of your empire that is not going to change in the short term, whether that is deprioritization because there's something else that needs to happen now, or whether there is an inherent risk with changing that. Have a look at those existing systems and what are they costing you. Maybe it changes your perspective on when you modernize those, or maybe it changes your perspective on, what are finite little tweaks. And then the final thing is, once you decide that you are going to change something in your organization because you've gotten a perspective from a costing approach, I think the overwhelming number of things that you could do to change a cost footprint on AWS is daunting. If you look at all of the things, like you could change the configuration of a particular service, you could adopt a new service, you could archive some things, you can go into savings plans, RIs. If you're an enterprise support customer, you can go into an EDP program. There are incentives from any number of different software ISVs. Which of all of those do you click together is a very fun exploration for teams. And I think that is where reaching out to account teams and having a good relationship with them and understanding what the different options are and how they could apply to you, and helping somebody to hold your hand through that decision-making process is probably a fundamental thing. Don't forget about the teams that support businesses, whether that is a consulting team that's working with you or a financial advisor or an AWS account team. We tend to reach out to those entities when something breaks, but really they're instrumental in the health and future of the overall organization. They have experience, they have a voice. Even if you don't adopt it, at least hear them out.
Ryan, this is great. One of the things I like about the way that you just panned that out is it really, like, the FinOps framework lays right on top of this, right? You've got your inform phase where you're getting your inventory allocation. Then the optimize phase comes next because, you've got that going. Once you have the visibility and the inventory, then you can start to really prioritize things to optimize and then work on that side of the house. And then the operate phase, the operationalization of all of this, which again, you pan this out in that exact same order from all the experience that you have and everything that you're seeing. Like, it totally lines up, and it's exactly what most folks I talk to, and again, the FinOps Foundation and its resources, the community, it's the way it's spoken about, right? And there's a good reason. And what I'm saying is that you've really kind of dove into the details of why things pan out that way from the migration perspective and the AWS perspective and what that looks like. So thank you for all of that information and the considerations, man. This has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. Before we go, Ryan, do you have anything else that you want to kind of add here or conclude with, or any last piece of sage wisdom for all of us, man?
Information around costs on AWS. The way that we communicate our service pricing is a little bit all over the place. So each AWS service has its own pricing page, has its own pricing constructs. So if you are looking at pricing optimizations at an AWS service level, I would recommend getting in touch with your AWS service team and bring them into a discussion. They're going to help shove you in the right direction quicker, and you don't have to suffer through it on your own. I do encourage any customer that is looking to adopt AWS or has already adopted AWS to look at the well-architected framework. And if you've never looked at it, look at the cost pillar and ask yourself, what of that am I missing from my organization? And then, of course, it's never too late to start this. I like to think that security is day one and cost is day 1.5. So, jump in with both feet and start that exploration and let us help you on that journey.
All right, man. That's awesome. I really appreciate it, Ryan. Thanks again so much. And Yeah, we'll see everybody next time.